Thanks to Athletic Greens for sponsoring this video.
Hey, what's up? In my world, there are two main styles of brownie. You got your cakey brownies and your fudgy ones. Today, I'm gonna show you how to make a good, better, and best version of my favorite style, fudgy.
The most basic or good version of this brownie recipe starts with 6 simple ingredients. This version is for the people who want good tasting brownies like immediately because they go from pantry to party time in only like 30 minutes. To get started, I'll need to grab a saucepan, and into that I'll add 170 grams or 1.5 sticks of butter. I'll move that over to the stove and melt it over low heat, and once it's all melty, I'll move that off heat and add 225 grams or 2 bars of baking chocolate. For this recipe and all of the subsequent variations, I'll be using a generic 70% cacao extra bittersweet baking bar. I tend to keep 3 or 4 of these on hand in my pantry because a bunch of recipes on this channel use it, including my flourless chocolate cake, my double chocolate muffins, and my chocolate chip cookies. Once the butter and chocolate are melted together and stirred until a silky emulsion is formed like this, I'll take the pot off the stove and then add in 200 grams of white sugar. I'll stir that in really well, and I'll mention I love this recipe because it's super low mess and really high payoff. There's no bowls to clean, just one pot, a spatula, and a brownie pan. Behind the sugar, I'll add in 3 whole large eggs. I'll give those a vigorous stir to get things combined, and behind that I'll add 200 grams of all-purpose flour that I've combined with 5 grams of salt. I'll stir that up, and no need to be too concerned about overworking this. There's so much fat in this batter that developing too much gluten here would be very difficult to do. I'll also mention that with a really simple recipe like this one, the order of operations matters a lot. If you don't add the eggs before the flour, they won't hold the starch and fat together, and when you go to bake it, you'll have an unbelievably greasy failure. Once you've got this batter stirred up into something that resembles chocolate cake frosting, it's time to bake it. For all the recipes in this video, I'm going to be using a good old-fashioned 8x8 metal brownie pan, but if you're a 9x13 guy or girl, just double the recipes. To make these brownies easy to remove from the pan later on, I've buttered the pan, then laid in a strip of parchment, and then I buttered the parchment itself. Once the batter is fully loaded into the pan, I'll give it a few slams on my counter here to make sure any air pockets are destroyed and to make sure things are relatively flat. Now I'll load this into a 350F 175C oven to bake for 24 to 26 minutes. About halfway, I'll come back and rotate the pan to make sure it's cooking evenly because pretty much every oven I've ever owned is like hotter in the front for some reason. Anyways, I'll bake this for another 12 minutes for 24 in total. After 24 minutes of bake time, I'll pull these out, and to determine doneness here, I don't really bother using a toothpick or a cake tester, especially for a fudgy style brownie because these are gooey and soft even when fully baked, and getting a clean pull on one of those would require me to over bake it. Now, after letting these cool for at least 20 minutes, I'm going to use the parchment to lift them out of the pan and then cut them into ninths. And there we go, a classic, easy to make fudgy brownie. These take like 5 minutes of active work. They only create 2 dirty dishes plus a dirty spatula, and I only used ingredients that I already had on hand. The flavor here is basic but clean and very delicious, and these are way more chewy and chocolatey than anything you can get out of a box. Fast, delicious utility brownies. What's not to like? Next up is the better version of this brownie. For this one, I'm going to bring in some additional ingredients to up the complexity of flavor and to level up the texture overall. This one's going to get started the same way as before, but this time with less butter. 1 stick or 115 grams goes into a saucepan, and I'll drop that on the stove over low heat to gently melt it. Next, I'll add in 225 grams of the same 70% cacao extra bittersweet chocolate that I used in the first recipe, and I'll give that a stir over low heat to gently melt the two together. That's going to take just a second longer, so I'll kill the heat and let those finish melting together, and then I'll move over to my cutting board where I've got a medium bowl set up, and into it I'll combine 3 large eggs, 50 grams of buttermilk. That acidity is really going to help balance out some of the richness and sweetness here. Then 60 grams of olive oil, because oil is an unsaturated fat, meaning it's liquid at room temperature, unlike butter, which is saturated and solid at room temperature. Solid fat makes baked goods seem less moist. Lastly, I'll add in 8 grams of vanilla extract, and then I'll grab my whisk and stir everything to combine. I'm looking to get those eggs broken down and whipped up a little bit as well. Behind that, 75 grams of white sugar goes in, and then 100 grams of dark brown sugar. That brown sugar is going to bring some molassesy base notes to make this brownie taste more complex, and since brown sugar is naturally more moist than white sugar, it's going to help push this brownie in the moist direction. The brown sugar does clump, by the way, so make sure you put your back into it and get that broken down. And once that's all homogeneous, I'm going to grab my melty chocolate butter here and stream that in. I'll whisk that up for about a minute or so, putting a little extra work here to fluff the eggs up to trap some air. That's going to make this brownie a touch lighter overall. And once I've got a nice thick chocolatey sauce like this, I'm going to scoop the batter off to the side and grab a second bowl to combine my dry ingredients. That's 100 grams of flour, then 75 grams of cocoa powder. I'm using natural cocoa powder here because the Dutch processed powder is harder to find, and I'm not interested in its more neutral pH. That stuff is useful for certain recipes, especially ones with chemical leavening, but since I'm not using any baking powder or baking soda, I'm going to go with the cheaper, easier to find natural processed cocoa powder. Lastly, I'll add in 5 grams of salt and then jump in with my whisk to stir everything together. Once they are, the dry bowl is going to get tipped into the wet, and then using a rubber spatula, I'm going to fold the two together until there are no lumps and everything is well combined. Once I've got a nice, dark, thick brownie batter mixed up like this, I'm going to grab my buttered parchmented 8x8 and then I'll load it up. From there, I'll smooth the top and bang it out. Then I'll load it into a 350F oven to bake it for 24 to 26 minutes. That's plenty of time for me to chug a little green from the sponsor of this video, Athletic Greens. AG1 by Athletic Greens is a nutritional supplement that includes 75 vitamins and minerals, a bunch of superfoods, probiotics, and there's a bunch of adaptogens in there too. Aside from eating brownies and lobster rolls this week for, quote, work, I do actually attempt to eat a well-balanced, healthy diet the other 99% of the time, but there's just some weeks where the brownies and the lobsters get the best of me. So for the past 6 months or so, I've been mixing a scoop of AG1 with water and drinking it first thing in the morning. That way I can get my body the nutrients it needs to keep on thriving. AG1's mix of ingredients supports your gut health, your immune system, recovery, and focus, but personally what I've really loved about it is the boost of energy that I get first thing in the morning. So to give AG1 a try, click the link in my description below and get a 1-year supply of immune supporting D3, K2, and 5 travel packs for free with your first purchase. AG1 is a great way to fill any nutritional gaps in a brownie and sandwich based diet like mine. So if you want to give it a try, again, the link is in my description. You'll get a 1-year supply of vitamin D3 and 5 free travel packs. After 24 minutes in the oven, I'm going to pull out the better version of these fudgy brownies. I'll give it a quick poke here to determine doneness. That feels firm but not dry, so I'll call it done. And since I put a lot more work into these, I'm going to let these rest for the appropriate amount of time as opposed to just cutting them hot like before. So about 2 hours later, I'm going to pop these out of the pan and cut them into ninths. That is beautifully dense and dark, and clearly they're super moist looking too. Texturally, these are just a little bit chewier than round one. They're definitely a lot fudgier, and overall just so freaking delicious. The added cocoa, brown sugar, buttermilk, and oil here have all teamed up with a little bit more of an advanced process to make something that is really quite special. Of course, you could stop right here and have a nearly perfect brownie on your hands, but this video is good, better, best. So in an attempt to trump greatness here, I'm going to show you guys the ultimate form of this fudgy brownie. Recipe-wise, we're looking at nearly the same thing as round two, just with one small but very meaningful improvement in terms of flavor. All of the extra is going to come from technique here, so let's get into it. First, I'm going to grab a small saucepan and heat it over very high heat on the stove. I'll give that a good 30 to 40 seconds to get up to a full rip, and once it's super hot, I'll add in 1 whole stick of butter. Oh, that's hot. To build one more layer of interesting flavor here, I've decided to brown off the butter. The fastest way to do that, in my experience, is to make the pan real hot first. As you can see, the butter browned almost immediately. Once the solids start to brown, though, they're going to sink to the bottom and eventually burn if we don't come back and stir pretty frequently. That being said, actually burning the butter takes a pretty long time, and even then it'll still taste pretty good. At this light golden stage now, I'll kill the heat and let it carry over for another 30 seconds or so. Once I've got it nice and dark brown like this, I'll add in 225 grams of 70% chocolate, and on top of that, I'll add 5 grams or 1 Nespresso pod's worth of espresso. But any easily dissolvable instant coffee would also work. I'll stir to get everything melty and combined here, and then I'll let that stand off heat while I get the rest of this mix sorted out. For that, I'll grab my stand mixer, and into the bowl of that, add 3 large cold eggs, 75 grams of sugar, 100 grams of brown sugar, then the whisk attachment goes on, and I'll froth up these eggs on high speed for about 4 to 5 minutes. Whipping some air into the mixture here is going to ensure a lighter brownie batter that is less dense but still very fudgy. Shout out to Brave Tart, by the way, for this idea. It's quite dope and allows for maximum fudginess without any heaviness, which is actually pretty hard to achieve. Once the egg sugar is whipped up into a camel colored fury like this, I'll add in my buttermilk, olive oil, and vanilla extract, and then while the mixer is still spinning, I'll grab my brown butter choco mixture and stream that in. Once I've got a nice thick glossy base for these brownies, I'll quickly mix up the dry. This is the same setup as for the better brownies. That's 100 grams of all-purpose flour, 75 grams of natural cocoa powder, 5 grams of salt, and I'll whisk it up. Next, with the mixer on medium speed, I'm going to add the dry in a little bit at a time over the side of the bowl like this. I found that dumping all of the dry in at once actually required me to stir this for a lot longer and harder than I would have liked, and I lost some of the lift that I got from whipping up the eggs. Once this mixture is fully hydrated and looking beautifully dark like this, I'll stop the mixer and then scrape down the sides to loosen up any of the dry stuff that might have stuck. Look at this batter. Out of all three of the recipes, this one definitely took the most work, but the batter looks the most luxurious by far, and I feel happy just looking at it. Now to finish these, I'm going to throw them into the old 8x8 lined with parchment. I'll spread it out evenly, and then to gild the lily here, I'm going to sprinkle on a very generous bit of chopped dark chocolate. This is that third heat needed to take these brownies to the next level for sure. Cocoa and melted dark chocolate inside of the batter are great, but once baked, this chunky stuff on top is going to bring a nice melty soft texture and provide some clean pops of pure dark chocolate. Next, I'm not gonna bake this. Instead, I'm gonna wrap it with plastic wrap and then throw it into the fridge to let the batter hydrate for 2 to 24 hours. This is a common move in restaurants or professional bakeries because it ups the level of fudginess considerably. Plus, it allows some more time for all these super complicated flavors to unify into something special. 2 hours later, I'm gonna pull this out, and the last move is my favorite. I'm gonna top the entire thing with a ton of flaky Malden salt. Adding pops of salt like this to sweet chocolatey stuff basically weaponizes it. The amount of deliciousness that your brain is going to perceive is almost scary, and it certainly does not exist in nature, so just be prepared. Now into the oven it goes, just like before, and I'll bake for 24 to 26 minutes at 350F. 24 minutes later, I'll pull these out, and already they look very sick. The melty chocolate on top is just a good idea in general and shouldn't be reserved only for the best version. Now, to absolutely max out the fudginess here and to further unify the flavors, once this is cooled off, I'm going to wrap it with plastic wrap and throw it in the fridge to age for at least 6 hours, but preferably overnight. The next day, it's time, you guys. You can see how fudgy this knife is just from cutting these things. And the inside is just so frickin' moist. But it's firm and chewsome at the same time. It's dark, mysterious, complicated, and this brownie lights up every single part of your food brain at once. It's like a John Coltrane solo. It just can't be contained. It's furiously beautiful. The words salty and sweet and chocolatey here just seem insufficient. Whether you go with good, better, or best, I think this recipe serves as a very solid framework, and your level of stoke is going to be high with any of the three. So I hope you try them soon. Let's eat this thing. Thanks again to Athletic Greens for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to head to the link in my description below to take advantage of their immunity bundle.